Campside Media.
Welcome to Inside the Tent. We're doing something a little bit unusual today. We are, rather than just talking about the podcast and the reporting that went into it with Nick, who hosted it, I brought in Anthony from the TV side. We worked together on a lot of the adaptations, and we thought it'd be fun to sort of sit down together and talk through just what this could be. God's Banker, this incredible podcast. It's doing so well. It came out a couple weeks ago. It's been just dominating the charts here in the US. There's an Italian version that Nick has been working on incredibly hard and that is just absolutely crushing in Italy. And it's just been really a fun show that's come out, been really noisy in a way that harkens back to the days of like, there'd be a limited series every month that would like blow up and everybody would be talking about. And it feels like we've got one of those right now. And it's been really great to get all the incoming calls. Our TV and film agents are hard at work setting meetings and doing all of the fun stuff that comes with a podcast being successful and feeling really cinematic. So I thought it'd be fun to have Nick and Anthony join me and we could kick around ideas, talk about threads that are maybe overlooked in the audio version that could be an important part of the adaptation, and also just sort of pitch each other our dream versions of what this could be as a movie or a TV show, and just all the fun stuff that awaits, even though the hard work has been done of making the podcast. So welcome, guys.
Thanks, Adam. Good to be here.
Thank you, Adam. Nice to be inside the tent for the first time.
Anthony, this is your first time inside the tent?
I'm a rookie.
Is it more spacious than you imagined?
Oh, these high ceilings, my God.
It's extremely breathable. I'm also new to the tent.
But not new to doing interviews about God's Banker. What were you saying before we got on, Nick? 12 a day?
Yeah, the Italian version, as you said, is has been doing really well, and I've had to do a bunch of interviews in Italian, so it's really good to speak English, if nothing else. Hello to the American audience.
Yeah, well, I only remember like 6 words of Italian, so thank God you're going with English. I can't speak for our listeners. But no, let's get into some ideas and let's talk about what we think this could be for the screen. The beautiful thing about God's Banker is that it contains multitudes, right? It's one of the rare Campside projects that could take place in the present and follow like Wind of Change style, like you. It could take place in the past, which is probably almost surely where it will take place as an adaptation. It could be a movie. It could be a limited. It could be an ongoing. It could be an Italian show. It could be an American show. It could be both. It could be all these different things. And so it's the rare project where it's worth sort of dreaming big and thinking about all those different avenues. And now it comes to the part where it gets turned into something.
There's a movie version. I mean, I like a version where Mario Platero is Kaiser Sose. But my thing, if we were going to differentiate, takes entirely, and Nick, you and I have talked about this, and this is just a Trojan horse that I don't think anybody's taken the bait on this, but I have always liked a version that's just, you've always said that the CIA was, there were CIA operatives crawling throughout Rome in the 70s. And I do like, if you guys have seen The Agency, that, what's his name? Fassbender show. It's like The Agency's paranoia, but in like a My Brilliant Friend type of 70s Italy, but set in Rome. And you've got all these like Cold Warrior, like camouflage Cold Warriors. I mean, this is a loose take, right? I don't really have this where I kind of would turn to you. The one thing that I would want to do, my main character is Carlo Calvi. Because I think he would have been in his 20s at the time. I like it being like young first job people with like CIA operatives in the mix. And that's just your more ongoing version. It's like kind of industry set in 70s Rome with these like camouflage CIA operatives. That would be the one that was like the most different, just to help somebody like wrap their head around that. Just to plant that seed. But otherwise, I like the 3 season the most. I also like an uncut gem style, like just fucking 6 days on the fly with, Calvi and Vitor, like that to me is a blast.
Yeah, I think I agree. For me, the where I see it most in my head is the 3 season arc. Because there's so much freaking content in this thing. Like it's just content nonstop, and so this could do it a ton of justice. Um, but all those make
Yeah.
sense. All those we got ton of goodies to throw at people. Um, but yeah, by God, the limited that starts with Sindona, which is such an easy appetizer for a U.S. audience because he bought Watergate. He had the biggest bankruptcy in the U.S. He was best buddies with Nixon. He was 100% in cahoots with the mob, and he was God's banker. Uh, he
They called him God's
They
banker,
call him
right? I
God's
mean, he
banker.
was the
He
original.
lived at the Pierre. This is Act One, Scene One, New York. The Pierre. He fakes his own kidnapping or whatever. Like he's in medias res. Start in the middle. It's so easy for here's a spoon for the American audience, all in English, which is also something to talk about. I maintain we should just try to be English on every freaking everything we can.
There's like a real, sort of rise of the global co-pro is in kind of the air right now. Like before we started Campside in like kind of, I don't know, 2017, 18, 19 range, you had shows like The Night Manager doing really well, where they would be, global enough that you could sell it to multiple territories abroad and then already have the show sometimes in the black or near it. Then you'd come back to a US market and say, we already have Spain and France and we have the UK and we have all these different territories. Now we just need a domestic distributor. And as long as there's enough of an American point of view, then you can justify coming in on it versus starting it as, hey, we're going to all the American buyers and you're straining to make it feel less international. I think it's almost easier to just lean into what it is, which is like a very global story.
Totally.
You've got the offshore banking and you have obviously Italy, you have the American elements, you have the Cold War elements, the bombing takes place in another country yet again. And so you have all these different natural multi-territory elements to it that it's almost easier to just lean into it as opposed to strain away from it. The one thing I was going to ask you, I've been meaning to for a while, is how, other than the fact that obviously he ends up in London and that's the bridge and that's where he's hanging, how many British characters populate the world? Because if you are going to think about the show as like it's for the world and we're going to put all these territories together, usually one of the key building blocks is the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And they tend to be, perhaps even more than American networks, they're like, what's the British character in this? What's the British way in? What's the point of view? So is there like a British character that sort of maybe is a little overlooked in the narrative because plot-wise it's not super essential, or thematically it didn't make sense to center that character? But is there like a great British character that you could elevate in the adaptation?
So there's a ton that unfortunately are come right after the whole. There's detectives, there's cops, um, but that's all you're saying before, like in the Calvi, in the Sindona and Calvi era. Um, it's a good question. It's a little light on the Vatican Bank. The gentlemen that run the Vatican Bank. There's a couple of British guys, very Catholic, very genteel Englishmen, um, that are all in all the rooms.
Who finds his body?
A postman for the British National Post finds him and he's on his route, and he sees this bopping body, um, and the whole apparatus that comes to terms. This great cop and the guy that does the autopsy. They all think it's a suicide. The Brits are completely convinced it's a suicide. So there's wonderful, and they're constantly fighting off the Italians. But that's end of the series type stuff. I think you guys want British people in the thick of it during.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like one stone to turn over and look under just to see, because again, it doesn't, you don't have to necessarily check every single box. It's not, United Colors of,
Of
God's
Calvi.
banker. I think there is an element where certain territories, if you go to try to set this thing up in that way, they'll go, oh, what's the character, what's the way in for our audience, and sometimes not. Like there's some shows that are completely specific to like you could have the show take place entirely in Rome and almost every character is Italian, and it could still be a huge hit for lots of different countries and audiences because there's a universal nature to the Vatican, obviously.
Right.
So it's there's Catholics everywhere. It's like it's not so specific that you can't have a universal element. I mean, and we've seen extreme versions of this, like Chernobyl, huge hit made by our good friends at Sister, and felt very universal, even though it was all socked in and taking place in this Cold War Soviet Union, and no one seemed to mind that everyone was speaking English with a British accent.
Yeah, that's
it made, it was fine. It worked. It had a mannered, affected. We're all suspending certain disbelief as we go down this road and have this journey. So there's a lot of ways to do it. There's not one prescriptive way. I was just kind of curious, just taking inventory. I mean, another question, and we can, by the way, this is all interesting stuff. I think we're basically making the episode right now. So it's like,
yeah, I was gonna say
the one thing that's interesting too is like, sometimes it's helpful to take inventory of characters that aren't necessarily critical in the podcast in the way that you're going on your journey, but that would be really cinematic in an adaptation. Maybe some secondary characters where you're like, this is going to be a great role. And if we are sinking into a year with Sindona and Calvi's on the rise, like who's a character that would become more elevated? Maybe it's a connect in offshore banking, or maybe it's someone inside the Vatican Bank that isn't as spotlighted in the podcast because you're condensed down to 8 episodes. But if you were in a 60 episode version of this world, like, are there some roles that jump up? That's another interesting way to go about it.
I would think another thing I thought about just now is the whole machinery that kills Calvi, which is the right wing expat community in London. They're all going to be in London speaking English, and that's all London. And so these are right wing antiquarians, which is their cover, but really they're super alt right, extreme right people, and it's a crazy ecosystem. That's very timely right now because these are kind of like ultra libertarian right wing crazies, and that's all London. That's all London.
Were they propaganda due guys?
These were expats from all over the world that were ultra right wing. There was a beacon in near Portobello Road. Funny enough, was a far right wing haven of Italian, Spaniards, British people, a series of like crazy landlords that housed all these right wing dudes. And in there is the guy who most intelligent people think ultimately actually strangled Calvi, who was an Italian, but who spent years and years he was a Londoner. So an enormous like British angle, the whole Loamy ecosystem out of which come out all the material killers have all been in London for years, and they're getting money from Jelly and all our main characters, but funneled to London, and they're all, which is so cinematic, they're all dealing in antiques. So imagine interiors antiques all the time. Antiques is a code word for extreme right.
Yeah, Nick, we might need this in the episode. They're like craziest far right people all over the world, just living in one apartment complex off of Portobello Road.
Oh, hell. Think about it, man. Think about it, man. It's the port of entry of the entire world other than New York and Hong Kong. And where do all the extreme militias go in the world to unite and have their kind of model UN of extreme right? They go to London in 1975 to 1982. Get in pretty easily. It feels European. There's still a strong culture of white pride, and the capital markets in London are so much better. You want to get money in and out, you try going to Calabria, that's a pain in the ass. You go to London, these guys are funneling tens of millions of dollars to their people. And it's so cinematic, man, that they do this through antique armoires, antique chairs. It's almost like a wink. Every time you see an antique, Jelly will talk about it in some of his depositions. He always says, "Oh, antiques, antiques." Antiques is a code word for we're going to kill 150 people in a train station. So, and this is something you can do visually so much better than audio, and it's cheap. It's an interior, it's an inside, a couple of antiques, and these are often charismatic, very attractive young men, all living in London, mostly in their 20s, highly radicalized.
Yeah, that's interesting, Nick. I mean, you've got the ability, if this was a Le Carre novel, you would introduce this pocket of the world, the antiques, code word, like little society almost, and then you would have them wondering how they're going to get more influence, more access. How are we going to advance our agenda? They're sort of below the radar in terms of people knowing about them, but their influence is lower than they'd want. And then we're also following Calvi. And of course, we're going to see that this is eventually going to collide, right? His desperation, his moves, his ambitions are going to end up opening a door for them to get a level of influence and access they didn't have. So you would want to set that up. I think in a TV show, almost like a novel, where you get to introduce pockets of the world and you don't totally know how they connect yet, but you're along for the ride, you can meet these people and let them become big characters. And then all of a sudden you have solved for like, what's the London part of this? Well, there's these people lying in wait in London, looking for the perfect opportunity, looking for someone like Calvi to come open the door where they can get the level of influence they never dreamed of, right? And that's how you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. And you can collide these forces and justify an ongoing show. And then it becomes a lot more like the European version of The Wire.
Yeah, and there's a version here where, as we're talking about this, you can get too far afield of the bedrock IP where people are just confused. Because as we're saying this, I'm like, oh my God. Yeah, you get kind of your Donnie Brasco character who is who's hiding amidst this group of far right lunatics who have, hiding behind the antiquities in this one, off Portobello Road. But that's an entirely different universe, right? I mean, it's like the main character. Then you lose the plot on why do you even need Calvi at that point?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the key nucleus around which everything rotates is Calvi and his cohorts have access to amounts of capital. This is a story about money, deep down. God's banker have access to quantities of money heretofore unseen. It's estimated that Licio Gelli took $250 million from Calvi for his causes. Poof, they were never found again. $250 million. It's 1981. Do the math. So at the center, I agree. We should always be somewhere between Rome and the Bahamas and Sindona, Rome and Milan. That's where the money's coming from. At the heart of it, you're right. But it's interesting that the final chapter of this story is London. And there's like a team that's on standby and has been for some time. Um, and paradoxically, if we think that Jelly was involved, Jelly stole money from Calvi slowly but steadily, and then used that money to pay for Calvi's murder. So there's a real loop closing. Um, the money that these guys get in London to do it, there's good reason to believe that came from Calvi's bank. So it's a nice bow we can tie. But I agree. Let's not go too far afield, and I defer to you guys. But should you want London, there's a ton to employ in that world.
Yeah, that's really fun. And just being able to set up that Calvi should have what he needs to go on the ride that he wants to go on. But because of the way he is wired, the choices he makes, the betrayals along the way, like he needs a strong man, to lean on. And then that's what opens the door for a whole bunch of people to get access to something they don't have. Right. And it's just, those are the mirrors of today, I think. Like that's where you just can really see. It's almost like you'd have to go with a light touch so it doesn't seem too on the nose. Like when people are afraid, they reach for strength. And then people who are willing to appear strong gain tons of influence. And then they have access to what they maybe didn't have before, which is perhaps political power or it's capital, to your point. I think money being the access point, like who has it, who distributes it, who gets their hands on it. I think that's what makes this really unique as a story. But the idea that we have these frailties and we have these weaknesses as humans and we open the door to things, that's what makes it universal, right? So there's a specificity to the time and place and the specific tools at issue, but there's a general takeaway that is like applicable to almost any time you tell the story. So that's always good to have. I mean, those echoes are going to answer people's question of like, why now? And, why would we tell the story now? And it's like, well, obviously the animating force in the podcast is there's a tip and there's a mystery to unravel and there's a, decades old crime that we think is worthy of investigation. I also think, Nick, it was a really interesting way in where you're like, you had a personal reason for wanting to know. Is this like a hysterical story that people want to believe because of like the hot-blooded like side of you versus the dispassionate? inside of you. And I think that was a really great animating force for you as an individual host, so to say. But the idea that there's a larger question that we're trying to unpack, it would have been relevant 10 years ago, today, 10 years from now, it's always going to be relevant because these stories tell us like who we are, really.
Yeah, I agree. And final thing I'd add, because I've done, so the podcast is like exploding in Italy. So I do like 12 Italian interviews a day, which just come in and it's really wonderful. So I've been forced to think about what this all means quite a bit. I'm coming off my like 11th from today. And the thing I've kind of realized in real time, it's fun to actually speak it and say this in English, which is I'm so much more comfortable speaking. Um, and that is that this was a war, this was a moment. This whole story is happening at a time when both sides are in the existential war of their life. Calvi, Sindona, make no mistake, Paul VI, all our guys. Yeah, they want to make money, and yeah, they're fighting for their family and they want notoriety, but they are operating under the premise that they are fighting for the survival of capitalism against the evil forces of communism. And by the way, vice versa if you go on the other side of the Iron Curtain. But what I love is that these guys are operating under our way of life is about to end. Like the world's about to end. And I think this is subtle, but if you ask a lot of people on the street today, like, are we people will say we're in a battle for our way of life, like our way of our survival, our country, our you go all over the world. And it's so fun. It's interesting to see it dramatized in the 1981 version, where the stakes are higher. They're fighting because they don't want nuclear holocaust. But there's something about people operating under that tension that I think is really exciting. That's more of a kind of a philosophical thing, but it's very cinematic. I mean, the big red phones are everywhere. This just came out in the Kennedy documents a week ago. 47% of foreign embassy staff, especially also in Italy, was CIA undercover operatives under State Department cover. That's 50%. So you walk up to Via Veneto, which is the Dolce Vita road with a huge American embassy sits. You walk in 1979, say knock, knock, open the door, show me the 350 operatives in this building. 150, 125 are undercover CIA officers. We know that, and we didn't know that a week ago. That's new. And the Cold War is here, guys. Like it's not 1950, but it ain't 2005. So the stakes are so high for these people. The Pope is fighting the Cold War. That's why he's using Calvi. Sindona is fighting for capitalism, including using the mafia. Deep down, like these guys were fighting a battle that is almost it's a crusade. So that, as Anthony says, let's not overload stakes, philosophy, and settings, but it is fun to play with. Like I imagine that tick 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 tick. They're all very much on edge. And what are you capable of doing when you think you're fighting for the last couple days of humanity because the communists are about to invade? You're willing to do a lot of crazy shit, and you're willing to be talked into a lot of crazy shit, which Calvi was. You know, so that's just something I've been thinking quite a lot about because I think it's super real and it's urgent.
If you're looking for one character, I think that you could peel off and have his own spotlight, and not just cynically for, a tentacle to an American audience. He does seem pretty fun. Give me that movie, The Pope's Bodyguard, who ends up running the Vatican Bank. Like every time I hear you say this in the podcast, I'm like, that can't be true. How is that possible? This guy swaggering around Rome in his Chevy, smoking cigars, a little bit tipsy on, like 3 glasses of whiskey, and he's calling the shots. He's running the bank. It's just like he's such a gem, and I think he could probably take the spotlight himself in a Marcinkus movie. Is there a version where he could be, what was the relationship like between those two guys? Could he be a plausible supporting character number 2 in a Calvi limited or movie?
Him and Calvi were tight. They were like this. Calvi would often go to the tower where the Vatican Bank was in. They shared secrets. Calvi knew everything. Marcinkus knew everything about Calvi. They're the two protagonists at the highest financial level. It was those two guys, that tower, those cigars, secrets. But enormous room for it. Enormous room for it.
Thanks so much for listening to Inside the Tent. If you haven't already, don't forget to go to joincampside.com to become a free member of the Campside community. That's joincampside.com.